the University of Michigan, are they in a worse situation than when we talked about them 2 weeks ago right now, or are they in a better situation? Because the way that I see it, Mark is saying that they're just pointing fingers right now. The way I see it is that this sign stealing scandal looks to be a lot wider than anybody thought, just like NCAA wide. It seems to be a lot more of an organized thing than really anybody accounted for at this point. And now Michigan and Ohio State Classic are pointing fingers at each other and saying, no, you sign steal worse than us, which in of itself is kind of a silly concept because again, not illegal, but now we're at a point now where it's like we're seeing how ridiculous this concept actually is, which it's a competition, man. People are going to do whatever they can to get a competitive edge. So what's the deal at this point, Mark? Do you have like a strong take on it? Because right now I'm
Yeah,
just sitting around confused.
I do. And I'm going to make it personal to you because you sound like every strong diehard Michigan fan that I've heard talk about this. Um, John's in denial. John's sitting here saying that everyone's sign stealing and that it's a common thing and that it's not illegal and it's not a big deal and Michigan bent the rules, didn't break them, and why wouldn't they get a competitive advantage? Here's what happened. Here's what we know has happened. Now, we don't know how serious it is. I think it's much more serious than anyone's even making it out to be, and this investigation is going to show that eventually. The reality is everybody sign steals. John's right. When you're across from a sideline, if you coach football at any level and the team is signaling, you're going to try to pick up on what they're doing. If you see stuff on film when you're watching during the week, you're going to try to predict what those signs mean. You're going to write stuff down. You're going to study other games. You're going to try to figure it out. It's part of the schematic advantage that you get. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody does do that. Where there's a fine line, and Michigan clearly crossed the line. They sent a staff member on their coaching staff to other teams' games and had him film these signs directly. That's illegal. He was on the sideline, and at this point, it's almost all but confirmed because they still can't confirm who that individual was, and it looks just like the dude. Okay, whether it was planned or not with Central Michigan, that dude was Connor Stallions on the sideline dressed as a fake coach for Central Michigan so that he could get first look, sideline look at what Michigan State signals were because they would play them a few weeks later. Also, on top of all of this, who knows how deep that goes? That's just what we know right now. That's on the surface, in which, by the way, both of those things are illegal. Faking the Central Michigan coaching thing to steal signs, illegal. Going to other teams' games in the stands, buying tickets to playoff games, filming the signals is illegal as well. Direct violations of NCAA rules, right? On top of all of that, it's everything that's happened since 3 years ago. Flashback 3 years ago, Jim Harbaugh's on the hot seat. Is he going to go to the NFL? Are they going to fire him? This was before he got his contract extension. Can't beat Ohio State. Should be competing for national championships. Is not. Winning 8-9 games a year. Choking against Michigan State. The snap, trouble with the snap play. All of that, right? You remember this. He was on the hot seat. I'm assuming you even at one point probably wanted him gone.
I didn't, but I clearly remember this a few years ago.
All of a sudden, something changes and Michigan becomes a powerhouse.
Come on.
Right around the same time. Think about this. Think about this. What would Jim Harbaugh be willing to do to make sure that he continues to coach at his alma mater, to change the image he has, to get the contract extension he wants, to try to compete for a national championship at the school he loves and played for?
Eye roll.
I don't know to what extent he'd go to, but everything that's turned around for Michigan has also happened at the same time that this sign stealing scandal has dated back to, which is when they beat Ohio State for the first time in a decade, which is when they've dominated Michigan State, which is when they've made the college football playoff appearances, which is where they've been a national contender 2-3 years in a row. All of it dates back to the same time that they got the schematic advantage. And I don't think people realize how big of an advantage they have when they were stealing these signs. It's one thing to get a couple reads on a few signs and have a good play on a third down here. They knew what was coming on almost every single snap in some of these games. And the fact that these Big Ten coaches are getting, you're even hating on them. So I've heard other Michigan fans hate on these Purdue coach for coming out and saying that it's a problem. Now they have to huddle and change how they're calling plays because of it. Ohio State coming out and saying things. Rutgers came out and said stuff. Iowa said stuff. Penn State, Franklin came out and said stuff. Like, everyone is coming out. These are respectable dudes, respectable coaches that have done it a long time, are saying that they have a problem with what happened with Michigan, and people are bashing these coaches and saying, well, just beat them. You're making excuses. Just beat them. They're won by 50. So would it really have been close if they didn't cheat? How about just go win the game an honest way and leave no doubt and don't cheat to do it? I have a serious problem with it. I don't know how extreme it is. If it's only the Central Michigan coaching sideline thing and a few games that he went to and filmed, still illegal, still should suspend Jim Harbaugh. I think you have to. And my whole problem is the next few weeks are critical, because if you don't punish Michigan, I don't think you should punish the players because they're not a part of this. They received advantage as players, but they weren't a part of it. You have to punish Harbaugh. You have to punish the coaching staff. I feel bad because you can't punish the players, but you have to take Harbaugh on a suspension when they play Penn State, Ohio State, and then if they make it the Big Ten championship. If they make the playoff, let them coach. If they still earn their way there, let them coach in the playoff, let them into the playoff, and all of that. But if you don't punish them now and they make the playoff, and God forbid they win a national championship, and then more stuff comes out, then you have all these teams that are like, well, what would have happened if we figured this out before the playoffs started? We probably wouldn't have put Michigan in. Maybe what happens to those bubble teams like Washington, Oregon, Texas? If Ohio State loses to Michigan, those teams that are going to have one loss, Alabama, LSU, like Notre Dame, all these teams that could be floating around at the time. I know some of those teams are probably never have a chance of getting in, but some do. Those teams are going to be like, hey, we would have been that fourth team had Michigan been punished at the right time. Because they know they violated rules now. It's just a matter of how badly did they.
All right, if anybody's tired of Mark's voice yet, I'll step in and counter a little bit. So here's the thing, is that the NCAA, the way that it has been organized for a very long time, has allowed teams to take advantage of things. And there's always been asterisks related to this team or that team because, this team recruited harder and paid their players off, or all of these other things. You've heard it with the U, you've heard it with Alabama, all of these different eras in college football. To go ahead and say that Harbaugh is only still coaching in Michigan because he started sign stealing so much harder than everybody else in order to beat Ohio State and over to get over the hump, like that's just not at all a reality.
All I'm saying is he didn't beat him until he was stealing signs.
If everybody's sign stealing, you cannot convince me at all that them sign stealing harder than everybody else was that competitive edge they needed to be the dominant program that they are now. I don't believe that for a second. Is there definitely stuff that's illegal that should be investigated that Michigan's done? 100%. From what it sounds like, the news cycles, the conjecture that's going on, there's a lot of other fishy stuff, especially in the Big Ten area around sign stealing and the lengths that people are willing to go in order to steal those signs. And not to mention, all of this could be solved if the NCAA, kind of like with NIL, just realizing it was a battle they can't win, decided to just allow freaking microphones and headsets on the sidelines and in helmets. You change this entire conversation instantly if you just turn around and like modernize the slightest amount and allow people to start doing that. Because the argument right now is, well, not every program can afford to do that. Are you shitting me? We're giving players on the field tens of thousands,
don't twist
hundreds
this
of
argument,
thousands
though,
of
John.
dollars.
Don't twist this argument. I agree with that. I agree with that portion of the argument. The argument is not whether or not the sign stealing is outdated or anything like that, or whether or not it's more efficient to have, like the NFL does, a headset in the quarterback's helmet and the huddling, the old-fashioned way that they've been doing it in the NFL with great success for many years. I agree that that's how they should do this, and it solves the problem. The problem is that the way the NCAA is set up right now, they don't have that. They have signals. That's how most teams will call in their plays. That's the way that the NCAA has been for the last, 10, 15 years. And what has happened is Michigan took rules and directly violated them worse than anybody else. The sign stealing as it sits is not illegal. It is a tactical advantage that teams do.
We're making an argument of just they sign stole harder than everybody else.
No, they did illegal things. They did illegal things to sign steal better than anybody else. That's the problem. And it's not good. They did illegal. They sent a guy to different games to film. He dressed as a random fan.
They dressed in disguises in order to steal signs.
It's actually honestly honorable how extreme they went to do it. It's laughable, but at the same time, John, in all seriousness, it ruins the competition and the honesty and integrity of the game.
I can't get behind that part of it. I really
John,
can't.
I cannot tell you how much as someone who calls offensive plays as a coach. Now, I do not call college plays, but I use signals. I call an offense for a high school team. If the other team filmed my signals and knew exactly what play was coming every single time and had the opportunity to tweak their defensive calls and audible to be keep in mind, Michigan's a very good football team aside from stealing signals. I never said that. I never said they were a bad team. All I'm saying is when you give a team that has that much talent a tactical advantage like that, they're almost unbeatable. That's all I'm like. It's not just because these other teams that are stealing signs, John. The honest way to steal signs, like we said, is not illegal. They don't have everything, and they don't have as much in-depth research done as Michigan did. Michigan had literally call sheets, okay, pieces of laminated paper, and they'd watch the signals, tell the coordinator what is coming, and they would call. Like literally had almost every single play figured out.
Yeah,
like this guy was a former Marine.
Some of the news headlines that you see are hilarious, though, because if you've played football, you know these are ridiculous. Where it's like, well, these players said that we checked into a play offensively, and then a Michigan linebacker screamed that he knew which play they were running or which gap they were shooting. It's like, Mark, you and I in high school have seen that on defense.
Yes, that
right?
happens. And that's film study, and that stuff's gonna happen. But we've never seen it to this extreme, John, where you literally have a guy standing next to a coordinator and saying, this is exactly what they're going to do. This is what this means. Call this.
Again, we're mad
it's
at
like,
them.
Dude, it is such a big...
Stealing. We're not mad at them for sign stealing, then. We're mad at them for sign stealing harder
illegally.
than other people.
Not harder, illegally.
More effort behind it.
No. Yes, more effort, but illegal effort. It's where you direct... If they were just so good at stealing signals the legal way, John, that it was a tactical advantage, good for Michigan. But the reason... They're not better than anybody else at doing it. This isn't a good job, Michigan. You figured out a way to steal signs better than everybody else. They cheated to do it. You have to admit those words that they cheated to do it, and other teams were not doing it that way. And that therefore they were much better at stealing said signs than anybody else by far. And it affects it definitely directly affected their success on the field.
Look, I'll say this.
It's a problem.
I'll say this much again, and we'll move on because we've been talking about this for too long. It's one of those things where there's a very simple, easy fix that changes the entire dynamic of the situation, which is just the NCAA modernizing just the slightest amount. Because again, you can't convince me that this is such a massive. It looks silly for sure, but to think that Harbaugh should be suspended mid-season, can't get behind that, and
He has to be.
No,
will be, by the way.
And I cannot get behind the idea that they are going, the reason why they are, again, got over that hump and start beating their rivals and start winning these Big Ten championship games is because they started stealing.
That's
signs.
the problem with cheating is we'll never know.
Yeah,
we'll never know if
we'll
they
sit around and talk
games.
about Deflategate forever too. But I just think that's the entire concept of
Deflategate's a big deal too. But again, just saying that we should make the rules better so teams don't cheat is not an excuse. You can't make excuses for Michigan. If this was Ohio State doing this very same thing, you would be on my side of the
Ohio
argument.
State is doing the same
No,
stuff.
they're not. They're not sending people to get... Who? What evidence do you have of that?
There's been all sorts of conjecture around them.
From Michigan. Trying to make it look not as bad.
Having laminated sheets of all of their calls on it.
Yes, but they got those signals legally. There's a difference.
So
there's nothing illegal about making a laminated sheet. No. They were not sending... you literally just won't admit that Michigan did it illegally. You're giving them credit. They broke rules to do it better than everybody else. That's what they did.
If the line in the sand, again, is what level of effort you put into sign stealing...
It's not effort. It's breaking the rules.
All right. The methodology being slightly different than other teams.
No. Very different.
Right.
And very illegal.
Watching signs on a film versus sending a
yes, because most teams, John, most teams, just so you know, on their film have two people stand behind the signalers with a big banner and block the film from getting the signals. I will show you clips of it if you would like. So a lot of teams block you from doing that. But when you're at the game, you still can see them. That's why it's an NCAA violation. That's why it says it in the NCAA rulebook that you can't do that. And Michigan said, we don't care about the rules. We need to beat Ohio State or Harbaugh's ass is out of here. And so they broke the rules and they bent the rule book. And they totally are going to get screwed over by it. I'm telling you right now.
This is the most overblown story in this entire
I thought it was overblown too. I actually think at this point that is definitely reasonably being talked about just enough. And it's only going to get worse. And I want you to prepare for a Harbaugh suspension. And if they do not suspend him, prepare for everything that happens the next 6 weeks, good or bad, to be vacated. I'm just telling you.
I'll sit around and wait for disciplinary action and what all these investigations entail and what ends up coming with
I'm excited to see because I'm actually very curious how serious it gets. But even as it stands right now, Harbaugh at least should be suspended for the remainder of the regular season.
Disagree. We'll move on. We're talking in circles at this point. But
I love this conversation, though. John doesn't even... He's such a Michigan fan you are.
Yeah, I am. You're right. Born and raised.